What is the greatest UFC fight of all time? As you can see by the thumbnail of this video, you know which fight I picked. I'm going to be going through what I believe is one of, if not, the greatest UFC fight of all time. I'll be running through a fight criteria I created, which I used for selecting the fight. I'll be chucking in some honorable mentions to pay respect to some of the best UFC fights I have ever seen. And to end the video, I will be breaking down the fight round by round, just to show you guys why I think this qualifies to hold the title of the greatest UFC fight of all time. I have ended up choosing Jiri Prochazka vs. Glover Teixeira as my greatest UFC fight of all time. Now fellas, hear me out. I know people straight away are going to be saying, how isn't Robbie Lawler vs. Mike McDonald 1 or 2 here? And how is a fight like Conor vs. Nate Diaz 2 not here? I'm going to answer that with 2 statements. Statement number 1, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be going through my fight criteria, my fight selecting criteria next to explain my reasoning for picking this fight. And number 2, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion, and I respect others for having a different favorite UFC fight of all time, and I would like everyone to let me know in the comments what your favorite UFC fight of all time is, and if you think I could add or take anything away from my fight selecting criteria I made, so please let me know in the comments below. Let's get right into the fight criteria. My first criteria is it competitive? This is a very important one, if not the most important one. I believe masterclasses from one fighter are fantastic, they are great, but they can't be included since a great fight should be competitive, it should be a back and forth to a degree, so that's why you won't see fights like Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar in here, or like an Ilia Topuria versus Josh Emmett, or any one-sided beatdown you can think of. I just don't think you can include masterclasses in one of the greatest fights of all time. A great fight should be competitive. Anyways, the second criteria is high stakes. Does the fight have a lot riding on it? What I'm looking for usually here is title fights. I feel like the highest stakes you can get in the fight game is fighting for the belt, and that can really level up a fight in my eyes, especially when you're selecting from very, very close bangers. The next criteria is longevity. 1 to 2 round wars are insane to watch. For example, a Gaethje versus Michael Johnson was sick to watch as a fan. I love that fight. But I believe the fight going the distance, or at least 4 to 5 rounds, is important to include in this since it created more chances for more moments and shows fighters battling through that adversity. They've already taken damage. It shows their heart and determination to finish the fight, to keep going. That's something that I think should be looked at in the greatest fight of all time. The next criteria is the entertainment factor. Big moments. How many and how often were they in this fight? These are the oohs and ahs from the crowd, crazy exchanges, fight-ending sequences. A lot of the fights can be super exciting at the start of the round and then end up tapering off towards the middle and end of the round. So this is a super important point to take on board. It gels well with the next criteria, which is brawling type moments, crazy exchanges on the feet where the fans are going insane. This is my personal opinion, and I believe, although I respect crazy grappling exchanges, fans seem to remember and love standing wars way more. I just know for a fact that they enjoy those types of fights more than crazy technical grappling exchanges. And the last criteria was, how high level was the fight? Were we seeing high level techniques on display to a certain extent? This criteria is not as important, but MMA is evolving and it can be the deciding factor when talking about the greatest fights of all time. So if you're comparing fights really closely, I think the more technical fight should edge out the less technical fight. Let's jump into the honorable mentions. In the honorable mentions, we have Lawler vs. McDonald 2, Diaz vs. McGregor 2, Poirier vs. Hooker, Griffin vs. Bonner, Jones vs. Gustafsson, Makhachev vs. Volkanovski 1. Something that's important to remember, it's all personal preference. Most of these fights I loved watching and could see an argument for how they could be number 1, but if I go by my criteria, some of them were lacking in certain areas of the criteria. For example, although Diaz vs. McGregor 2 and Poirier vs. Hooker were massive fights that were awesome to see, I may have edged it to Glover vs. Jiri since these fights were just fun matchups that were made and weren't high stakes fights for a UFC belt. Although I think Dan Hooker vs. Dustin Poirier specifically was a banger of the highest degree. It's just if I'm going by my fight criteria. I also think, although it's not here, Choi vs. Cub Swanson and Romero vs. Whitaker 2 could have been up here. Those fights were crazy as well. Now to move on to the fight breakdown. I don't think I've ever genuinely watched a fight where every single round, and I mean every single round for the entirety of the rounds, had crazy back and forth moments for both fighters, not just big shots landed, but shots and positions that look to be a part of fight ending sequences. So hopefully this round by round breakdown gets that point across. Round number 1. The light heavyweight strap on the line. These guys were off to a fast pace. Both guys were exchanging shots, but Yuri was looking really dangerous with his pressure. You could tell he was immediately trying to track Glover down. Glover manages to single leg Yuri a minute into the round and trips him to the ground. This is where he starts raining down some monster ground and pound on Yuri. So many damaging shots to the head and the body of Prochazka until he manages to escape into a scramble with Glover. Glover lands on top and continues to transition on the ground while landing shots on Yuri. Yuri manages to get up, only to be pressured by Glover on the feet, and then Glover Teixeira successfully single leg and tripped Yuri for the second time this round. But this time, he lands in full mount. Glover starts raining down more blows on Yuri, and the fight looks like it's close to being stopped. Until Yuri manages to work his way up by giving up his back, and Glover ends up sliding off of his back in the process of the scramble. Yuri now is throwing massive fight-ending ground and pound on top of Glover in top position until the bell rings. That's the first round, it's over, and it's a crazy start to this title fight. Round number 2. It starts right after a quick break in the action from an eye poke, but it didn't last more than 10 seconds. They started trading on the feet. Glover initially tries to pressure Yuri, but Yuri starts stalking Glover in this round and clips him, starts throwing the kitchen sink at Glover, flying knees, overhand rights, left hooks. At this point, it's hard to know how Glover is still standing after some of these blows. He takes a crazy amount of damage for what seems like a continuous 2 minutes until it looks like Yuri got countered by a flying knee or he slipped, but either way, Glover ends up on top of Yuri and starts taking advantage of this moment. He advances position, gets full mount, and starts raining down ground and pound that could have ended the fight. Massive elbows hitting Prochazka that slice him open until the bell sounds. Round 2 over. Moving on to round number 3. It starts with them immediately exchanging in the middle of the octagon. Yuri looks like he's having more success. He hits a knee to the body and starts walking Glover down. He stuffs a takedown attempt from Glover and keeps the pressure on. He stuffs another takedown and keeps the pressure on. He stuffs a third takedown after damaging Glover more, and he beckons for Glover to stand up and strike with him after he falls to guard. Once Glover stands up, Yuri hits him with some massive punches from both of his hands. A left lands, a right lands, then hits him with a massive knee up the middle. But Glover hangs on. He shoots in and is able to secure a takedown on Prochazka for the first time this round. Yuri works his way back up, continues to throw bombs at Glover. Massive knee hits his body, and it seems to drop him as he dives for Yuri's legs. Yuri ends up on top. Fight-ending damage is being put onto Glover on the ground, but as Yuri goes for a das on top, Glover reverses the position and ends up on top of Yuri. Glover starts ground and pounding Yuri into the canvas. The fight looks like it's close to being stopped again. Massive elbows, the right hand lands for Glover. Round 3 ends. The commentators are saying this fight is everything. We continue into round number 4. Glover starts to pressure Yuri from the get-go. Both exchanging big shots though, big body kicks from Yuri and great hooks from Teixeira. Glover manages to secure another takedown, gets full mount once again in this fight, and is raining down blows on Prochazka. How is this fight even going on at this point? Glover ends up switching to an arm triangle, but it doesn't look deep enough and opts for more of a ground and pound position. He then tries again for an arm triangle, looks super tight, and Yuri somehow rolls out of it and ends up on top of Glover. Fight ending ground and pound being landed on Glover until Glover works his way onto his knees and manages to take Yuri's back. Yuri ends up reversing the position again and lands on top once again and lands a few more ground and pound shots until the end of the round. We move into the 5th and final round. The crowd gives a standing ovation before the two fighters tap gloves and hug quickly to show respect for one another before going into their final round together. Both guys start exchanging in the center of the octagon before Glover rocks Yuri after firing a 1-1-2. Hurts him bad and has him hunched over, but Glover decides to jump for a guillotine. Glover slides off and ends up on bottom position with Yuri on top. Yuri decides to let Glover up, and after a couple of exchanges, Glover shoots in, but Yuri stuffs a takedown. Glover starts hitting Yuri with some heavy shots, having way more success than Yuri in the stand-up. Glover shoots in for the final time and is able to take Yuri down and land in mount. Glover's landing ground and pound until Yuri uses the cage to flip over and retake top position. It's unbelievable, but Yuri advances position over Glover. He takes his back and manages to sink in a rear naked choke and finish Glover Teixeira with 30 seconds remaining in the 5th round to become the new UFC light heavyweight champion of the world. I hope I encapsulated the fight well enough for those who haven't seen it, and remember, the fight is available to watch on the UFC YouTube channel as well. I would have loved to show fight footage instead of still shots, but I was worried about it being a potential issue. Hopefully, after everything you've seen in this video so far, I've been able to convince a few people that Glover vs Prohaska was the greatest UFC fight of all time. I want to say thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way through the video, guys. I don't make money off these videos since I'm not big enough to be monetized right now, so if you could, please leave a like on the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you're not as well. Thanks again for watching, guys, and see you guys next time.